Before the first dinosaurs ever walked across a forest, the oceans had already staged a drama so vast and strange that it rewrote the rules of life. Waves rolled over continents that were not yet arranged as we know them, and the sun poured down on shallow seas crowded with bodies that bore armor, spines, and grasping limbs. Eyes evolved sharper focus. Mouths became tools. Flesh hardened into plates. Long before any roar echoed across land, the sea invented its own arms race and filled the planet with hunters that tested every idea evolution could imagine. In the beginning of this story, the seabed was a plain of silt and lime where soft-bodied creatures felt their way through dim light. Then, during the Cambrian, something changed. Animals began to experiment with new designs at a pace that leaves a clear signal in the rocks. Body plans multiplied, joints appeared, hard parts took shape. The first predators that could actively chase prey rose from that surge. Among them were the Anomalocaris, creatures that looked like nothing alive today. Their bodies were flexible and segmented, built for undulating flight just above the sea floor. At the front grew a pair of long-spined appendages that folded like two combs into a grasping trap. Their mouths were circles of plates that closed like a camera iris, ridged and serrated, made to crush or shred once those arms delivered a catch. These hunters patrolled above forests of sponges and mats of microbial life, where trilobites grazed and scavenged. Trilobites were among the first animals to wear their skeletons on the outside as a shield of calcite and protein. Many had eyes made of crystal lenses clustered into compound domes, eyes that watched for trouble as they moved in tracks across the mud. When danger came close, they could roll into tight armored balls, tucking legs beneath head and tail shields, locking into a position that left little for teeth to grip. Fossils preserve this moment of fear, an enrolled trilobite frozen in defenses that never opened again. Sometimes the same layers hold fragments of trilobite shells broken into puzzle pieces that speak of a predator's success. At other times, the shells show neat bite scars that healed, proof that some escaped to grow and molt again. The encounter between Anomalocaris and trilobite shows why this era feels like a starting gun. Prey evolved thicker armor, spines, and the ability to enroll. Predators evolved stronger grasping limbs, wider mouths, and better eyes. In one spectacular case, a species of Anomalocaris preserved with its head intact reveals compound eyes with tens of thousands of lenses, each a tiny window to movement and shape. Senses sharpened against defenses, and the race to outwit and outrun began. As time passed into the Ordovician, the oceans deepened in complexity. Reefs formed from sheets of lime built by communities of early corals and sponges. The water column above these cities filled with plankton and drifting larvae. On the seafloor, trilobites scavenged alongside worm-like creatures. In the midwater, long, straight-shelled nautiloids rose as the new rulers. Their shells stretched into tapering cones, chambered with gas-filled rooms that balanced their weight and let them hover like silent spears. With jet-propelled movement and a crown of tentacles, these cephalopods could snatch prey from above or below and pull it toward a beak strong enough to not shell. In many regions, they became the top predators, their shells scattered through limestones like bleached trumpets locked in stone. Jawless fish also multiplied during this time. They were armored at the front, with bony head shields that turned skulls into helmets. They filtered food or scraped it, but some took a more active role and began to rasp flesh with tooth-like plates. Though they lacked true jaws, they were the testing ground for the idea of using bone to shape a mouth into a tool. The path toward bite and chew began quietly with them. The sea flexed and shuddered as continents moved and as climates shifted. A great Ordovician extinction pruned the tree of life, perhaps as glaciers grew and sea levels fell. Yet the ocean recovered and the race resumed. In the Silurian, new hunters took the stage. Sea scorpions, the Eurypterids, grew to lengths that make spines prickle even now. They were not true scorpions, though they were arthropods with jointed bodies and claws that could grasp fish and other arthropods. Some swam with paddles, swooping along coasts where their tracks are pressed into ancient tidal flats. They likely ambushed prey in the shallows, mixing stealth with speed as they dragged a catch over sand. By then, another innovation had arrived that would transform oceans forever. Jaws appeared in fish, first as small bony arcs that grasped and pushed, then as full hinged structures that closed with force. With jaws came the ability to seize prey and bite pieces. Fins grew stiffer and more precise. Bodies changed from armored boxes to shapes that could slice water. Some fish used bony plates to armor their heads and shoulders, while behind the armor their bodies remained flexible and fast. The blueprint of hunter and hunted shifted around this new tool. By the Devonian, often called the Age of Fishes, the oceans were at once fertile and dangerous. Reefs by then were massive living constructions built by corals and stromatoporoids, honeycombed with caves and cloaked in algae. The water above thrummed with small armored fish, early sharks and swift ray-finned fishes, and in those waters patrolled a monster that wore its skull like a fortress and its bite like a guillotine. Dunkleosteus was a placoderm, a fish with bony plates for a head and thorax, jointed armor that could open and close like a steel trap. It did not have teeth in the way later predators did. Instead, the front edges of its jaw plates sharpened themselves to knife ridges through constant use, two shearing blades that could crush or cut through bone and shell. The skull of Dunkleosteus anchors a jaw mechanism that not only closes with considerable force but also opens with startling speed. The bones that make up its head suggest a linkage system that could swing the mouth wide in a fraction of a second, creating suction that pulled prey inward before the blades met. Imagine a shark-sized body rising from beneath a school, head plates flashing pale in the green light, the mouth a sudden cave that snaps shut with a soundless kill. Fossil evidence of bite marks on the armor of other placoderms and on the shells of armored prey shows the damage it could inflict. In the Devonian, they were among the undisputed powers of the sea, coasting through reef channels and across open shelves, with movements that made smaller fish turn as a single herd. Yet even Dunkleosteus swam in a world where it had to solve problems its ancestors never faced. Armor, for all its power, is heavy. To move efficiently, you must either carry that weight with more muscle or abandon some plates for speed. Many lineages chose speed. Early sharks developed skeletons of cartilage and streamlined bodies that made them fast and maneuverable. Their teeth grew in multiple rows, replaced constantly so that a broken tip was no tragedy. Ray-finned fish refined fins into fans and spines that could pivot delicately, allowing precise control in crowded spaces. Others solved defense with spines and toxic barbs, turning a bite into a painful mistake. In every layer of the Devonian Sea, the same contest played out. Eyes, armor, speed, camouflage, spines, bite force, suction. The table of evolutionary solutions grew crowded. Across these ages, trilobites remained a constant presence, though they changed with the times. Some became spiny shields on legs, each spine breaking the outline of a body to confuse a predator's aim. Some turned smooth and flat, hugging the seafloor under their own shadow. Others became tiny and delicate, floating with plankton and filtering food. Entire beds of trilobites show mass molting events, a snow of shed shells from a population that grew, shed, and grew again in swarms. Among those shells, sometimes, a single fragment bears a neat V-shaped bite, a story of escape carved in mineral. Arms races do not climb to an endless sky, they loop through time. Environmental change resets the board. The late Devonian saw a series of crises that drained oxygen from seas and collapsed reefs. Some pulses were gradual, others abrupt, but the sum pruned away many lineages. Reef builders suffered, and with them the complex communities that wove through the reefs. Placoderms like Dunkleosteus declined and vanished. In their absence, sharks and ray-finned fish moved into roles left open, their lighter skeletons and flexible strategies better matches for the altered seas. In deeper waters, cephalopods with coiled shells began to share space with their coiled shell cousins that would later produce ammonites. On shorelines, new plants anchored soils, shaded streams, and changed the chemistry of runoff, a reminder that the ocean can be reshaped by what grows on land. But to understand why the sea invented such extreme bodies in the first place, it helps to linger on senses. The Cambrian surge did not only build armor and claws, it built eyes that could detect edges and motion at distance. Trilobites viewed the world through calcite lenses that focused light onto living crystals. Anomalocaris viewed the same world through domes of repeated facets tuned to pick out movement against a dappled bottom. Later, fish evolved lateral lines that read pressure waves, a way to sense a school or a predator in the dark. Sharks refined electrical senses that could pick up the faint muscle signals of a hidden prey animal. In reefs, color and pattern created illusions that fooled eyes good enough to deserve respect. The arms race is not only bite against shell, it is signal against noise, detection against disguise, and prediction against surprise. Fossil injuries act as footnotes at the bottom of these pages. In some eurypterids, healed claw marks suggest battles with other predators or fights within species. In trilobites, gnawed edges tell of failed hunts survived. In placoderms, scars and gouges scored deep into armor show, both territorial fights and close calls with feeding jaws. These traces are important because behavior rarely fossilizes, yet injuries tell of action in a moment, and of a body that did not die in that moment. A healed wound is the proof that not every attack ended in death, and that every design seen in stone came from a line that met trouble and made it through. The ocean also wrote its memory into chemistry. Black shales rich with organic matter whisper of waters that lacked oxygen, where few large animals could survive. Limestone with growth bands preserves the rise and fall of reef cities over millions of years. Iron-stained beds mark events when currents changed, or when the chemistry of the sea flipped in ways that favored one group over another. The story of monsters is not separate from these signals. When oxygen levels drop, large active predators suffer first because their big engines need air dissolved in water. When currents slacken, plankton may bloom or crash. When reefs vanish, ambush lanes disappear, and with them, the ambush hunters built to use them. Each crisis trims the sail of the arms race, and each recovery sends new designs into the water. If you follow this sweep from Cambrian to Devonian, you see that the sea built the idea of a predator long before land had anything that could compare. It tested claws and tentacles, it tested armor and speed. It tested rigid bites and slashing blades, suction and ram feeding, camouflage and warning color. It experimented with body sizes from tiny plankton hunters to Dunkleosteus-class giants. It invented migrations across shelves and daily vertical journeys through light and dark. It taught eyes to read and taught brains to predict. When later reptiles took to the sea, and when dinosaurs eventually ruled the land, they inherited a world already thick with strategies proven in water. There is a temptation to see these ancient animals as aliens. They are strange to our eyes, with mouths like wheels and shells like trumpets and skulls buckled into plates. But the logic in their shapes is familiar: a tool for grasping at the front, a platform of muscle to drive it, a sensor to aim it, a shield to keep the tool from being broken, a plan for movement that gets the tool to the right place in the right time. The sea solved these problems early and often, and the solutions echo in later ages. The jaws that close on a fish today echo the first experiments in bone and plate. The school that turns as one body echoes the swarms of trilobites that molted under a quiet moon. The octopus that tests a shell with careful arms echoes the ancestral nautiloids that tasted the water and sped forward on jets. Imagine for a moment a Devonian morning on a shallow shelf. The water is clear after a night of calm, and sunlight writes bright bars across a reef made of interlocking chambers. A cloud of small fish drifts at the edge of the coral forest. In the water above them hangs a shape like a cliff face, motionless. It is not rock, it is armor, faintly patterned with grooves where plates meet. A hinge opens. A mouth gapes wider than seems possible. The water around the mouth thins and rushes in, dragging the fish in a scatter of scales and flashing sides. The blades close. From the reef below, spines slide back into the darkness, and a cluster of trilobites resumes tracing lines on the floor. Farther out, in open water beyond the reef's shadow, something with a straight shell points its tentacles downward and drifts, as if listening, and then jets away. For a few breaths, the shelf is quiet again. Then comes a different hour. The sky has turned, the sea breeze raised a chop, and plankton has thickened the water. On a muddy plain past the reef, a body undulates with a slow roll. At its front, two arms sweep forward and close on a small trilobite that was a second too slow to enroll. The mouth flexes, plates turn, and the body moves on, gliding with easy grace over the place where a worm pulled under its own cast of sand. A little distance off, a trilobite curls tight and waits until the drift of silt lays a thin blanket over its shell. It opens only when the shadow passes, and when the vibrations fade. The ending of the tale is not a defeat, it is a handing on. The Devonian extinctions opened space for sharks and for the fish that would give rise to lineages filling today's seas. The Anomalocaris did not survive beyond the early Paleozoic, but their bodies proved that active hunting works in a world that had never seen it before. The straight-shelled nautiloids lost their crown, but their kin with coiled shells became success stories that sailed through later crises. Eurypterids dwindled and vanished, but they left behind footprints and carved armor that explain how an arthropod can become a top hunter in water. Trilobites themselves would last almost to the end of the Paleozoic, a model of endurance through change, before their own chapter closed. And Dunkleosteus, for all its power, reminds us that speed and lightness can win when the world tips toward low oxygen and broken reefs. What remains is the record. Rocks that began as seabeds now lie in cliffs where wind hits salt. Fossils picked from shale and limestone sit under glass and glow with the line of a jaw or the eye facets of a trilobite. Some show dramatic events. A trilobite enrolled, trapped mid-defense. A fish with a smaller fish half swallowed. A gnawed plate with deep grooves that match the cutting edge of a giant's jaw. Others are quiet. A row of tiny spines along a tail. A growth line in a shell that records a season of rich food, then a season of lean. Together they tell a story with no narrator and no hero, only a set of rules and a long series of experiments in how to live by them. Before there were dinosaurs, and before any forests shook with footfalls, the sea wrote the first long chapter of predation. It was a chapter about invention, about armor and speed, about eyes and edges. It set the pattern that later ages would follow and twist. When you look into the empty round mouth of an Anomalocarid or at the brutal geometry of a Dunkleosteus skull, you are not seeing monsters from nowhere. You are seeing the first drafts of a play that would run again and again, with new costumes and new stages, but always with the same theme. The living world is a contest balanced by chance and by change. The ocean learned this long before land did. The teeth and shells in stone are what remains of that lesson, and the lesson still stands.